Born in London, raised in Vancouver, schooled in Toronto and New York, employed in Rome and points beyond, writer Tom Rachman has a wide gaze. That his first novel, The Imperfectionists, was translated into more than 25 languages suggests his audience is equally wide. His new novel is The Italian Teacher, and it too offers a multinational exploration that asks big questions about belonging, legacy, and talent. Tom Rachman joins us now. Hi.
Hi.
Fantastic read.
Thank you.
I know you're not supposed to really get too involved with the characters, but at the end of the book, I was like, oh, that bear. The last two novels that you wrote, including this one, so three all in all, the protagonist happens to be a foreigner living in a foreign place.
Yeah.
Your experience, does that inform your writing?
Definitely. I think that I've lived in lots of different places, as you said, and I first came to Canada when I was 7 from the UK. And I think that somehow these shifts that I've made, both of that's formative stage of life, but also later on the choices, the moves that I made voluntarily, they had the effect of sort of detaching me from any particular place. When I lived abroad in Paris and in Rome, I found myself in this strange expat community where you're condemned or blessed, depending on your attitude, to be an outsider forever.
So you don't become attached to any place?
Well, I feel attachments to every single place that I've been, but I feel that I don't necessarily feel exclusively connected to that place. I feel like you have the disadvantage of not having a single place that you belong to, but you have the advantage of being able to absorb the aspects of different cultures and places that you've admired.
And where are you living now?
I'm in London.
And do you consider that home now?
In that's where my clothes are and my family is, yes. But I don't, I never feel certain that I'll stay anywhere.
Well, the protagonist in this book, well, one of Pinch, he's the son of American and Canadian parents, and he has a dreadful childhood growing up in Rome. What was it like for you growing up in Vancouver? It
was the opposite of dreadful. It was very nice. That's entirely a work of imagination insofar as I was lucky I had two extremely kind and thoughtful parents, both of them psychologists, and they, I think one of the aspects of the way that we were raised is to have a great appetite and curiosity for other places in the world and an independence which has served me very well, but that my parents now kind of regret because all their kids are dispersed around the globe. Right,
they're no longer close enough to them.
Yeah.
What do you share in common with Pinch?
Well, I think that there's probably a tiny speck of the writer in just about every single character that's written. And I'm not talking about mine, of course, but on all of them. I think that there's an unavoidable perspective, a tiny bit of your perspective that will be projected into other people. But then again, the real endeavor of fiction and the pleasure of reading it, I think, is to be able to enter into people who really aren't you. So there's a certain element of your viewpoint you can't escape. But what I like to do, and what I always desperately try to do, is to think about what it's like to be somebody else in a different situation, in a totally different circumstance. That's what fascinates me.
One of your protagonists in your second book was a woman.
Yeah.
So how did you get yourself in a headspace to write from a woman's perspective?
Well, I think it wasn't profoundly different than writing other characters who aren't me. I viewed her not primarily as being defined by her gender, but as being defined by having a rich personality that I was really curious to know and to spend time with and to try to explore and understand. And that was clearly a feature of her, but there were other features that could have defined her just as well. But I wouldn't want to ever write a character who felt simplistically one thing or another, defined by being, say, Canadian or defined by being Ugandan or French or anything. I like the idea of thinking that these are individuals in their places. And yes, we're all influenced and conditioned to a degree by where we've come from, but just as much by our parents, by our place in the family, by our place in society, and by our own personality and our will too. And so I try to thread all of those together and come out with somebody particular and unique.
And speaking of place and family, Pinch has a father who has multiple children with different women. You also grew up in a family where you had half siblings.
I thought you were going to say I have multiple children with multiple women.
Well, I don't know your life like that.
Not true.
But what was that experience like? Like, are you close to your siblings?
Yeah, very close to them. I have two siblings, two half siblings, and I grew up in Canada, but they were quite a bit older, and they continued to live in the UK, and so I've gotten to know them much better since I returned there. I've never lived in the same place as either of them, or the same house, and so they've always been important parts of my life, but distant ones until recently, and now I have, as an adult, I have a new connection to them.
The Italian teacher centers in the world of art. In preparation to write this book, how did you familiarize yourself with the art world?
Well, it was a great deal of research. I have absolutely no skill in making art myself. My limit is the stick man, and my stick men aren't even that credible.
That's really, artistic. It's all subjective, right?
That's true. That's true. Mine, yeah, they're not even convincing stick men. So I took some lessons in painting and in drawing and in pottery, and I interviewed a number of artists, some who are extremely successful and others who have never gained the sort of success that they probably deserve. I was curious to know, one of the themes in the book that we may discuss later is this idea of who gets recognized and who becomes acclaimed and why. And so I wanted to understand that by speaking to those who were working in the business. It's important to me to try to write as authentically as I can about different milieux, even if I don't know them well myself. And I take my journalistic background and I try to research or report on these things. So aside from those interviews, I also read a huge number of accounts of the lives of artists and anecdotes, and those were often kind of harrowing reading.
When it comes to research, you were a journalist. Do you think that makes you a better writer?
I think it's certainly been very useful to me in the way that I've developed my writing, because aside from anything else, technically it was useful. I spent thousands and thousands of hours working on words and working on deadline, and that crammed a lot of experience in how to manipulate and move and use and construct sentences and how to organize a story as well. And working in professional writing that way, you're particularly conscious of how to tell a story in a way that will draw somebody in, hopefully, and keep them reading and hopefully have them reach the end of it. Of course, it's a very different scale of a project when you're doing just a newspaper article that might be 1,000 words versus a book that might be 100,000. It's also very different to be writing in journalism about what can be seen and recorded in the outside world, which is really the work of that business. Whereas the strength of fiction, among other things, is the ability to report on the inside world of people other than yourself, people you can't know, and people you can only imagine. So there are differences, but I found that foundation to be tremendously useful. And then subsequently, I also used the reporting practice that I had to try to gather details so that the world I'm writing feels alive and real, I hope. And my ambition is always that somebody who is from that world, who works in that world or lives in that world, would read it and feel that it was satisfactory.
And they can get lost in it as well.
Yeah.
To give people an idea of the writing, could you please read a passage from the book?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
It's right there, it's marked.
Nobody came to meet an unknown lady potter. They're here for Bear Bavinski, creator of expressionist masterworks, wild colors crashing across each composition, a bare throat filling the huge canvas, or a roll of tummy fat, or a pricked shoulder. His detail portraits are too intimate, uncomfortably penetrating, despite never once including a subject's face.
Did you see any real-life artwork that inspired your creation of this character?
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking particularly of the period of abstract expressionism. So post-war painters, most of them were based in New York. Most of them were these men, and they were doing these kind of very self-serious, emotional painters like Jackson Pollock and de Kooning. And it wasn't just the art that inspired this character, but also the story of the artist, the lives of not just these characters, but many in the history of art who have been huge, charismatic figures who have lived like human bulldozers, just moving forward towards their ambition of greatness and often leaving a great deal of flattened people in their wake.
When you say bulldozer, it's very much about the art and not about the people that are around them.
That's true, yeah.
Why did Bear not include the faces?
Well, in these paintings, which he considers portraits, they're these immensely detailed, wildly colored pictures, as you were saying from that excerpt. And he never has the faces in them because I think he wants them to be projections of himself, that there's a sort of extraordinary egotism in the man, that he's painting other people, but he's trying to express himself. He's trying to be the subject of every painting. And so it's his perception, it's his sight. He wants to ensure that how he sees the world endures beyond his existence. So even long after he's dead, the world can look and see as he would have seen. So allowing him some sort of form of immortality.
Well, you write that Bear Bavinski makes art for art's sake. What does that mean?
It doesn't mean very much in most cases. It's a bit of it's among the many myths about the arts, the idea of art for art's sake. What that means is somewhat mysterious. Usually what's intended by it is the idea that there are no other motives beyond this, that there are no other drives in the artist but for the pure expression. That's certainly possible for art, but it's not common for art that is intended to be displayed or read or listened to. If that were the case, then why would you ever bother trying to introduce it to the world if it was just for its own sake? If you just cared deeply about the production of it, why would you mind that it have a wonderful exhibition, or that it be read by lots of people or listened to by lots of people? There's another side to it. I think that there's a great deal of tension, even conflict, between two parts of the arts. One is the bliss of the making of the work of art, which is truly blissful for anybody who's ever created artwork at any level. If you enjoy that process, you disappear into the act of the creation of it, and it's a form of euphoria when you disappear in that way.
But feedback is very important. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say that the other side of that, of this conflictual relationship, is the fact that presumably if you're doing that, you also want to express something. You want people to see it and recognize it. But the moment that you do, it starts to seep into, almost infect, the way you can work on your own. And so some people get tangled up in the desperate desire for the approval of their inner life, in a way.
That's what I was going to say,
Yeah.
because feedback seems to be very important to Bear.
Absolutely, and I think that many artistic people feel this strange kind of push-pull with the audience, the public, the world, that they on the one hand want to reject that and say, I don't care, I'm just doing it in my own vision. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, they desperately want the good reviews and to be in the right collections and to be given awards. And so it's the inner life of the artist and the outer life of the world, and the two are often at odds.
Well, with Bear, a lot of the people who do sit for him end up being his wives, but they don't seem really significant compared to him. Why was that? Well,
I think he's in some ways a monstrous character who's devouring everything around him, and he sees those and sees the world really as sees the human beings around him as having value insofar as they further his career. Mm. And the people who come before his canvas are for him material in every respect. And I think that as appalling and horrifying as that sounds, and it is disturbing, it's not that uncommon that people in the arts, some of them considered great artists, behave in this shocking way to those who should be dearest to them. They are so driven to achieving their ends that they're willing to grind up anything around. And there's no question that if you look at the history of artists in all different media, there are shocking, disturbing tales about how they've treated their children, their spouses. And that's something that I wanted to explore, how much ugliness we are willing to accept in the name of beauty.
And then I think one of the things that seems to be driving Bear is this legacy. You would think that children are part of your legacy, no?
They're a different part of your legacy, and the danger for a character like Bear is that they have their own will and self-determination, and they can go their own route. And what he's interested in is total control, his own legacy. And so a child is of value to him and has a role in his life to the degree that they are willing to be complicit in building his legacy. If they veer off and they want their own lives and their own independence, then he doesn't want anything to do with them.
And that line, "You work for me. You've always worked for me."
Yeah.
So how did Bear meet Pinch's mother, Natalie, and end up living in Rome?
What happened was that he was there doing a fellowship in Rome. This was in the early 1950s. And he was doing an American Academy in Rome fellowship, which exists and is one that has brought many important people in the arts to Rome over the years. He's attending that, and while he's there, a young Canadian art student is also in the city. She's taking classes and feeling a little bit alienated from those around her, a little bit lonely. The two of them find themselves at the same art shop in the center of Rome, not far from the Pantheon. And he's trying with no degree of success to communicate the sort of glue that he needs.
And there's like a 20-year difference between them, right?
Yeah, there is a 20-year difference. And she, however, immediately recognizes him because he's been featured in a spread in Life magazine on this wild Greenwich Village artist living a pretty dissolute, extraordinary life in New York, and she knows immediately who he is and is a little starstruck to see the man abroad in Rome, and she intercedes to translate for him, and that's the first language translation that moves on to being a connection between the two of them.
And now Bear is not very present in Pinch's life. What effect did that have on Pinch?
It formed and deformed him tremendously. He is so needy of his father's acknowledgement, and he is so drawn to his father's charisma and his father's status and role in the world. That becomes terribly seductive to him. And he's pulled between the two poles of his mother and his father, that he longs to match his father's greatness in the world of art and somehow join in that success. On the other hand, he fears becoming like his mother, who is herself an artist of exquisite talent, but has many things going against her, and as a result is not thriving. On the contrary, she is gaining almost no recognition for her work. And he fears becoming her and longs to become him.
What I found really fascinating about Pinch's character was that he spoke so many languages, yet he seemed to be afraid to speak to anyone. Why did you do that with his character? What were you trying to say?
Well, there are two parts of it. One part is that I'm fascinated with languages and the access that they allow you to other cultures. And when you do learn another language, you just realize how much you're missing in every culture you don't speak the language in, because it is the key and it is so much a part of it. And the other aspect of that is connection with other human beings. And that is a key in this book, that he is a man who struggles to connect with people, partly because he's been so warped by his desire to mesh with his father, with his huge ego, that he's unable for a long period to establish his own self, his own personality. And consequently, he is always teaching himself these languages as if maybe that would be a way to access other people. There's the parallel, of course, to art itself, which is a form of communication and effort in all of the different types of the arts. They are invariably an effort by somebody or some people to communicate something to a larger world, to strangers often. And it's very difficult for them to get across what they intend and to know if they've achieved it. And that's quite like, it has a parallel to his efforts with language.
And he's very critical with himself. I'd like to read another excerpt from the book. And this is at a party for his dad. Surveying the crowd, noting that more than a few people are looking at him, knowing who he is, the middle-aged son, like a shorter, uglier version of Bear, who works as a teacher in London. If he had been born to another father, they would consider Pinch's achievements perfectly respectable. But relatives are judged relatively. I love that. Mm-hmm. Pinch is an Italian teacher. He's done okay in his life, but this pains him. Why?
Well, the title of the book, The Italian Teacher, is meant ironically when you've read the book, because he is an Italian teacher. He's recognized as an Italian teacher, seen as an Italian teacher to the world, perfectly good thing to be, and yet he feels inside that he should be a great deal more, and he's always strived to be a great deal more. And the irony in the title is that through a series of secret events, secret that become revealed when you read the book, of course, he has become a great deal more than just an Italian teacher. But the question is whether he'll ever be recognized as anything more. So it's the question of who you are and who you're seen to be by society. So his father is battling for this role of great man in the world, and the son longs for that sort of role. The father achieves it, the son doesn't, but the son perhaps contains a great deal more.
And as a youngster, like you said, he wanted to be like his dad. As a youngster, he tried his hand with art.
Yeah.
How did both parents react to what he painted?
Well, his mother responded with profound enthusiasm because she recognized the talent that this young man had, and also saw the passion he had for the activity, and perhaps as well saw in him a way to remedy some of the faults and flaws that she saw in her own personality that inhibited her from becoming the artist that she wanted to be on the world stage. And from the perspective of Bear, he was altogether far less comfortable with the notion of any competition, anybody in the family daring to hold their own exhibition someday. So his response is a little more complicated and dark.
And we've been talking about you were born in one place, you went to school in a different place. You managed to travel the world in a world that kind of seems like it didn't have borders. But now borders are something that are becoming very complicated. What's your take on the rising populism around the world? Well,
personally, I'm very saddened by many of the developments in this regard. I think that what I value the most is certainly in where I live. One of the main reasons why I live in London and have loved to live there is because it feels so international. It's another thing that I always valued so much about Toronto when I lived here, is that it is such an international, multicultural city, and you feel that you have glimpses of the entire world in a city like this or in London. And that sort of interaction, that richness of variety and life and cultural experience and past, and the blending of it and the introduction to it is, for me, among the most vital aspects, most vibrant aspects of my own experience. And the idea of voluntarily shutting that off seems to me not just sad, but a tragedy and a stupidity, a folly that is so serious that it is upsetting to see people turning that way. I would add that it's something that many people, including myself, believed had been consigned to the past, that in the last century there were so many disastrous consequences of nationalism and foolish patriotic ideals that excluded other people. It caused such bloodshed and pain, and I think that after all of the worst wars of that century, we believed that we were starting to move beyond that, and to see its resurgence is a terribly sad development to me and others who view things the same way. Britain has, in my view, developed and been enriched so marvelously by the influx of other people, just as with the English language itself. The English language is composed of so many other languages. It has a vast vocabulary because of the fact it has always absorbed words from other cultures. And the country in recent times began to, in a way, replicate that in the population. There were, if you go to a city like London, certainly, you feel like you have the world there. There's the former mayor used to say something like, there are 300 languages spoken in London alone, and
the food. I lived there too.
And the food, and yeah, it wouldn't shock you to believe that were true. So many languages, so many different cultures represented there. the idea of rejecting that and expelling people, or at least closing the borders, seems like a very tragic turn to me. But it also demonstrates that there's more to understand in a society than the cosmopolitan richness that people like me enjoy in a city. That one of the things that we've seen is that there are other currents in society, and perhaps we have to attend to them or be careful about them, lest they wreak havoc. Because aside from anything else, Brexit is going to be an absolute idiocy and damage to the economy. So even if you cared nothing about anything else, then that itself is madness.
And you have a young son. Have you thought about what that impact would have, having grown up in an environment where you could go anywhere and live anywhere?
Well, yeah, I have a lot. I mean, I hope that the change won't be so radical that it would impede him from doing many of the things that I was able to do. But it's especially relevant in our case, as in many others, because ours is an international family, in that my partner is Italian, and so our son is growing up with 2 different languages and with part of his culture in continental Europe. And one of the reasons I like being there is not just because London is so full of different cultures, but also because it has access to so many amazing countries so nearby, that it's 2 hours to Paris and less than 3 hours to Rome, and that you have all of this variety and amazing places so close by. The prospect of closing those borders is a sad one.
Tom, thank you so much for being here. It's such a fantastic story, the Italian teacher of a father and a son, the complicated relationships. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.